I would like to officially say hello to everyone and welcome you to it has started. Welcome to the remote gathering concerning diversity in the remote workplace. I'm going to get right to the crux of it. In today's discussion, we are talking about culture and community in remote workplaces. What's really at stake today in the conversation is really about a genuine sense of belonging. To feel safe and able to be ourselves, to share our opinions, to feel cared for, to feel accepted, to contribute to the best of our abilities to a common cause and purpose. So, do you hear double audio? Anyone else? Everybody else okay with the audio? Okay. So, this is not going to come as a surprise to any of you, but in Deloitte's 2020 Human Capital Trends Report, they ranked belonging as the top human capital issue organizations face today. And here context is important. Many people feel the world is becoming less stable, more polarized, and more volatile. Just turn on the news any day and you'll know this to be true. We know that throughout the world, political polarization, tribalism, and populism give way to this us versus them division mentality. The workplace, of course, is isolated from this phenomenon. Many organizations are struggling with fostering to. Hello, Stella. Hey, I can see you, Stella, and I can hear you. So great. Welcome.
Oh, so sorry. I log in 15 minutes beforehand and it took
No
like
worries,
this
no worries. I was
long.
just giving the introduction. I'm just talking about the workplace being not isolated from this idea of division in the world. And I know that many workplaces are struggling with fostering the sense of belonging. Internally, alternative work arrangements brought about by the pandemic and shifting attitudes have left many workers feeling less connected with their jobs and their colleagues. So here we are in this virtual room from locations around the world, whether you're in an office, co-working space, calling from your balcony, in your dining room, or in my case, from my bedroom. Welcome. If belonging is about being seen, supported, connected, and proud to be who we are and connected together, then this is what I wish for all of us gathered here today. I can't see all of you, but I can feel your presence. And it's also in the spirit that I would like to welcome myself and introduce myself and the panel. So my name is Glen Chua. I'm an anthropologist by training and a co-founder at Open Tree Education. Joining me are the following amazing panelists and industry leaders. We have Melina Berry from Power to Fly, Andrew Jackson from Earth Justice, and Stella Lee from Paradox Learning. All of our panelists are leaders of remote companies or hybrid companies who have and continue to build communities of belonging, really focusing on equity and accessibility. Now, I want to do as minimum speaking as possible, so I'd like to give space to our panelists to speak about the work of their organizations, as well as to address some specific issues concerning our topic today. I have some questions, but of course, let this be an organic discussion as we go about. If you want to ask questions or add comments, the chat is open. I'm going to begin really simply, Melina, Andrew, and Stella, with a question and also an opportunity for you to just say hi to everybody. So let's start with a greeting from each of you. I'm going to do the alphabetical by last name order here. And really an answer to this question to start off our talk today. What does belonging mean to you? It can be to you personally, or it can be to you in the context of the organization that you're in. And I will start with Melina Berry.
What a beautiful question. What it means to me. So I am an immigrant, like twice, right? I left Bulgaria at the age of 19 to go to college, and then I left the Netherlands to come to the US, arriving a week before September 11th. And so I'm kind of an immigrant twice. And so I feel like I've been searching for belonging all my life in some ways. And so that's kind of one, right? On the other hand, again, as a woman in this world, what does that mean? I mean, it's such a loaded question as a parent, and I think for me, at the end of the day, it's about not being asked where are you from, or how are you different, as literally the second question that you get asked in society, in the workplace. But it's about how do you it's about how do you make others feel like yeah, that everybody is part of the same thing and not how they're different, how they're the same. That's really how I think about it.
Yeah, I love that. And I know it is a very big question. We'll have a little bit of time to talk about it today. So thank you so much, Melina. Okay, if my alphabet is correct, Andrew?
Sure. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Melina. I love that answer. For me, so welcome everyone. I'm happy to be here with you this afternoon and to talk a little bit about this really, really important topic. For me, belonging is a sense of ownership of an organization, of a culture, and a sense that for me, when I feel I belong to a culture, to an organization, in order for that to be true, I need to feel that I can bring my whole self to work, be who I am. And that means not just sort of, my sexual orientation, various attributes of my life, but it means I can bring my human self as well, the feelings, the experiences that we go through, the things in the world that impact us. And that's true, not just for me, but for the people that I work with, my colleagues. That to me is the greatest sense of belonging, when we can really be ourselves and value what is unique about each of us in the workplace.
Exactly, I love that. And also, Andrew works in a hybrid situation, but different from Stella and Elena on a regular work day, as I understand. So interested to hear that perspective and how belonging relates to that kind of more nuanced situation. Thank you so much, Andrew. Stella?
Thanks, and hi everybody. Good to see you guys again. It's so interesting how we all have a different interpretation of belonging. I think to echo back both to Melina and Andrew. So Melina, I moved to 5 different countries, about 15 cities. So I kind of lost track. So kind of like you, interestingly to me, I don't attach the label belonging to like where I'm from or like which country I belong to. Like to me, like I grew up in a very globally minded family. I have friends and family from all over the world. I moved around over the world. So to me, it's not so much that I kind of fit in anywhere that I live. I make it, I guess, I make it my home, right? I make it my own. It's more about like to what Andrew is saying is more about the culture. To me, it's more like finding my tribe, like where can I work toward a common goal with the group of people or with organizations that share those values, those passions, those goals. So to me, I'm looking at belonging from that perspective, and of course, again, very nuanced. And I'm not just looking at like working toward one goal. Sometimes I have multiple goals in parallel, multiple pots, cooking on the stove kind of thing. So it also changed depending on context, depending on different communities and different organizations that I associate myself with. So
Great, you're completely right. There's of what belonging means, and also based on your own experience going through life, right? We all come to work with a very unique perspective and history as well. Before we go on with the discussion, and I have specific questions, Stella, I am going to start with you, just to give you a little bit of warning. I would like to preface it with something that Andrew said actually in a previous discussion that we had, which is basically that we don't know all the answers. There's the fire truck. We don't know all the answers. This is, the whole idea of remote and hybrid work is really something that we're in right now, and we're trying to discover best practices as we go through it. There's a lot of experimentation, there's a lot of trial and error, but it's part of why we're having this discussion today. And I think we can learn from each of the panelists here. I want to start with this idea of technology, Stella, and this is particularly pertinent considering that we are meeting together in a virtual room now, that we are all using technology to connect in this remote environment, whether it's work or just communicating as friends or colleagues. We know that workplace technology can be a contributing force both to connecting and disconnecting in a way. And so we know that technology like Excel events right now is enabling this type of instantaneous communication with us calling in from all different places, but it can also increase ideas or feelings of isolation as well. Many virtual workers are citing feelings of loneliness as one of the challenges to remote working. And we also know that, statistics, at least from the US, we know that people who regularly work from home has increased like something almost over 150% since 2005, I believe. So it is becoming more relevant to us today. I'm going to ask you, Stella, about this idea we can leverage technology to specifically to advance equity in this idea of accessibility for different types of people in the remote workforce. And if you could speak about that from your experience.
Sure. Thanks for the warning, Glenn. I mean, the reason why Glenn asked me is because I'm trained as a computer scientist. I work primarily in the digital education space. So that's my context where I'm coming from. Yeah, I think as my experience of joining this panel today illustrates, technology can fail, and it will. So I think that's the first premise we need to consider, is that you can be in the most advanced country, the most connected city. All it takes is like a power outage, right? So I think always plan for failure, or have a plan B. So don't assume everything's going to work smoothly, especially when you're working with people with different connectivity issues. It could be even within the same city, but clearly across the world, is that you want to think about options. What are options for low, medium, and high tech? It's hugely important that people have that options. And it's not just from a technological perspective, but also from a communication perspective. Some people, perhaps English is not the first language, or whatever language we're communicating in may not be the first language. It might be a better practice to provide closed captioning. I know with AI tools nowadays, there's so many options that you can give people. You can have closed captioning, you can have transcription, you can have a live summary of what people are saying, the key takeaways, key points. So those are good practices in general. Think about the different mode of delivery, not just for communication and working, but also for developing your staff, for training purpose, for performance support as well. So that's the big takeaway, and also giving people control and agency. I have people that say, "Oh, I've just taken an online course, a training I have to take for work. It's 3 hours long, and you cannot mute, and you cannot turn off your camera." And that, to me, it's everything you're not supposed to do to make it inclusive. You have no idea what people's circumstances are. You don't know where they're connecting from. You don't know, perhaps they really need to mute the camera. So taking that away from people not having agency, to me, that's not being considerate, not being inclusive. That's not best. If anything, that's learning by negative example.
Yeah, those are great points. And also, sorry, Stella, in your context, you are working primarily as a remote consultant. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, for you personally, how do you feel connected to the people that you work with, whether it's clients or colleagues or partners? When you're calling from your home and looking at a screen, sometimes maybe there is a video, sometimes there isn't. How do you navigate that space and feel like, yeah, I feel connected to these people on a day-to-day work basis?
I mean, I usually try to get to know them, like, not just from a business perspective. I think I came from a human-centered design discipline. So, like, technology could be very dehumanizing, right? And so you want to put people in the center of things. You want to, like, this is just a tool. This is just a way of connecting us, but that doesn't take away from the same sense of curiosity when I meet you in a coffee shop, like it doesn't take that away. So you still wanted to get to know people. I always have, some icebreaker questions, that goes beyond just about what we're working on together as a project, or especially when you're connecting with people internationally. I always like to know a bit, I want to research a bit of fun facts about the cities or the culture that you're connecting with. So that seems to help. Yeah. And again, just work with people's comfort level as well. Like sometimes people don't want to turn on the camera. That's totally fine. You can still, your tone of your voice convey so much as well. In a way, it's nice to focusing on just one input instead of, sometimes it's too much. When you're looking at Zoom or any video conferencing, when you have so many people, it's almost like you're looking at like 20 different TV screens. Everybody's doing something different, right? And it gets tiring. So also understand that some people just like, hey, can I just call you? And I'm like, yeah, totally great. Like that's fine. So I think humanizing the experience and understanding there's, differences in people communicate. Some people, they just want to get to the point, and that's fine too. It's just don't force things onto people when they're not comfortable. So
I think that's a great reminder. And as a thread for this conversation, I think, in my mind, there's two things I want to mention. I'm keeping in mind that beyond this room that I'm in and my little Logitech camera and this screen is a real human being that I am communicating with, right? And so sometimes it's important we forget that sometimes, right? And I think the second thing that I thought about when you were speaking was just that imagination is so important. And so I can look at a Zoom room full of little screens, like you said, 100 little TV screens, or in my mind, when I actually have a talk or am speaking to other people, I am imagining that we are, like around a round table, or we're discussing in the same room. And if I can imagine that, then that's going to shape my experience, right? Rather than speaking to an inanimate object that has moving images and colors. I think it's a very different experience.
There's actually technology that is working on that right now. This criticism about video conferencing is so linear because you can only see like tiles of people. And with the advances in metaverse, right, with virtual reality technology, you could put people in a round table virtually.
Yeah.
And you can like turn and look at the person next to you. Instead of we are like staring straight.
And these are all new experiences, at least for me. I think younger people who are growing up today kind of are indoctrinated to that way of thinking and interacting from an earlier age. So it definitely depends on what kind of history you're coming from in terms of the learning curve to communicate and interact in that virtual meta space. I think it's all actually pretty exciting, and I'm pretty open-minded to what is coming up for us. I want to move on to Milena, but I also want to remind Andrew, Stella, please feel free to interrupt and jump in, especially when I'm talking. But Milena, I would like to go to you next. And if you could speak a little bit about Power to Fly and how, as I understand, Power to Fly really works with people from all over the world, and you have partners literally around the globe. And I'm interested in knowing the opportunities and perhaps challenges that working with such a global workforce can present to you and your company.
Yeah, so I've worked fully remotely since 2006 or 7. So since the job I had before Power to Fly, and I held that job for 7 years. I've now been at Power to Fly for 9-10 years. So it's approaching 2 decades, my experience of working fully remotely with a global international team. At Avaz, my team was truly kind of, I had 3 major time zones, right? North America and South America, Europe and Africa. And then I had India and really people into Australia. With Power to Fly, we have some folks in India, but we haven't gone further east because, to be honest, it's, give or take an occasional person kind of taking vacation to the Philippines and deciding to work from there. But, in general, we're trying to stick across those 2 time zones, right? The European kind of and Africa, EMEA massive, and then the Americas massive. I think I have found a lot of great success working with folks in Latin America. Also, a lot of great success with allowing just the remote work in the US has given me access to great talent. And again, we've done this since day one. I think in many ways we've preached remote work to all of our customers as a way to achieve diversity in their organizations. Surprise, surprise, Meta finally, Meta outputs a report since 2014 on how they're doing with their diversity metrics. And many years in a row, it was very, small steps, incremental steps that they made. And the year that COVID hit, and they finally kind of embraced remote, it was amazing how their diversity numbers changed year over year, right? Like true turnaround, almost parity. I mean, incredible stuff. So I think it was interesting to kind of see from a diversity lens how important allowing remote is, because otherwise you're kind of stuck with whatever the homogeneity of the pool around you is, right? And of course that's going to look differently around different parts of the world. But why limit yourself to that, since technology allows us to do that? So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've seen the evolution. So the very first days I think I worked remotely, it was literally ICQ in 2001.
Oh my God, I remember that.
Yeah, then I remember going to Skype in 2005 and 6, which was mostly for chatting, by the way. We never did video, was not even available on Skype, and we rarely did audio maybe for these like weekly syncs when the whole team got together. Then we went to Slack. I mean, like, it's really evolved, and now it's almost feels like, it's funny. I laugh about it because my wife has a culture where almost like turning on camera is not that it's not encouraged, but like nobody does it, right? Like it's totally okay to not turn camera on. At Power to Fly, there is this pressure of like, let's all be on camera. It's our chance to kind of see each other and glimpse a little bit more what's happening behind the scenes. But so it's kind of it's been a living kind of evolution, and ebbs and flows on that front. I guess, and I want to kind of encourage companies to be open to the different scenarios and what their organization needs at that time, and who the workforce is that works there. Frankly, when I spend like about 5 weeks every year approximately working out of Europe every year, because I'm originally from there, so I try to spend some time in the summer with my family, and of course I have to work from there. It's hard to have video on when you're working in a village, or even a capital in a less developed country. I mean, frankly, it's sometimes hard from Brooklyn as well. So like, it degrades the quality of the meeting if you require the video. So yeah, I don't know, what was the question?
I think, I mean, that's great to hear all the context. It's incredible that you work with such a global force. And I think I'm more interested in the ideas of, when you talk about connecting, just even let's say if you work in Brooklyn and the company is solely Brooklyn based, you're in the same time zone, even that has challenges, right? With how you connect through the screen. When you're working with different time zones, people calling in, it's like 8 a.m. in the morning or like 8 p.m. at night, somewhere it's dark, somewhere it's bright, maybe videos on, maybe videos off. How is it? Because I know there must be a lot of stuff that you're virtual events and ways to connect that, whether it's a work meeting or whether it's something that's more extracurricular outside of work. What things have worked for you in terms of really trying to foster that sense of belonging, or really just increasing this idea of, all working together, even though we're so geographically distant?
Yeah. A couple things. So first of all, at Avaz, some companies do kind of mandatory, on quotes, just because, if you, I guess, pregnant or, like have anything going on, sick, like you don't go. But, my previous company, Avaz, we did twice a year mandatory retreats where we literally dropped all day-to-day operational work almost, and we just focused on team building and kind of, strategy and road mapping, right? And that happened like 2 weeks out of the year. Twice a year, you get everybody in person. I think at Part of Life, frankly, we were a little bit more, scraping by on the finances. And so it is an expense to get together people. I think it roughly costs $2K a person. If you're a business owner trying to budget what that would cost you, $2K per head per event, right? That's roughly your cost. And so for us, we haven't done a retreat since 2015 was the last time we organized it, but we get together as like subgroups, either sub teams or like leadership team. And then sometimes there's this geographic get together. So people from different functions, if they happen to be in one city, they'll, we'll pay for lunch or dinner, or, if somebody visits New York, so New York is one of those things that people like to come visit. We always kind of get together for lunch. And then we've built in some activities inside the virtual schedule to foster that belonging. So We're launching a health challenge, for example, for next month, where people are going to be competing for the team that's going to log in more steps. And, like, I don't know, last month was something else, etc.
I love that. I'm coming to you, Andrew. I'm making my way across the hallway to you. And I'm going to do that by way of segueing with the idea of communication. So, in my mind, I really loved what you said, Melina, about this idea of starting with ICQ and the uh-ohs, and then moving to Skype. And it really has been an evolution of the technology and the platforms we use to communicate. Again, the idea of communicating with people, just even understanding and being empathetic with how we communicate with one another it needs to be an effort regardless of whatever platform you're talking about, right? If I'm talking to Andrew face to face, there are still many things that we need to know and many things we need to understand about each other, whether we're talking through there or through another platform. With the idea of, and this is a question open to anybody, the idea of communicating with someone from a totally different location, who may, have a different identity, a different belief system, a different religion. Are there things that have presented real life challenges in your workplace? I guess, Melina, I can kind of go to you first if you want to speak about it. Just even in terms of, what holidays you're observing that day, or whether you're fasting that day, or whether, you have some kind of restrictions or open mindset about something. How do you navigate those types of differences and maybe use that to be an opportunity in the workplace?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Again, I like to focus on how we're the same, not how we're different. But then, of course, as certain events happen, we also try to educate, right? So, for example, we did an Oracle, one of our all hands, where part of the agenda was about sharing what Ramadan means and how people observe it and what it means to them. And last week we did a call on Pride, which was similar, right? And the month before we talked about our Asian American leadership as a company, right, and what their professional journeys are. And so through storytelling, I suppose, is the short answer, right? Through storytelling, we actually, first of all, educate each other, open each other, like the eyes towards the beauty of our diversity, right? But then, of course, we have to educate each other and keep learning and be accountable for that self-learning to continue.
Yeah, I love that piece about education, and I know that Stella and Andrew have a lot to say about this idea of education and learning and really experimenting. This is my segue to you, Andrew. So I appreciate Andrew's presence here because Andrew works with Earth Justice, and they are a hybrid, following a hybrid model right now. And so, Andrew, I'd like to start by just kind of getting the lowdown on what Earth Justice does and what the work situation is like in a hybrid environment.
Yeah, thank you for asking, and I'm happy to talk about it. So Earth Justice is the world's largest nonprofit environmental law firm. We litigate primarily in the United States, but we also do work in several other countries on issues related to the climate crisis and air and water quality for communities, often disadvantaged communities around the world. And it's a fabulous mission, great people, and our mission has never been more urgent than it is at the moment. And we find ourselves at this pivotal moment trying to figure out how to transition from the pandemic world. We made the very abrupt pivot to from pre-pandemic to pandemic mode, and now we're sort of inching our way back into what is the new normal. And as Glen is pointing out, we had a pre-call, and I was sharing with the panelists on the pre-call that the challenge we've had is that this is a brave new world. Nobody really knows, certainly not in our organization. We don't really know what the new normal looks like. The expectations of staff are different. The sense of our culture is a very strong culture as an organization. We're very employee-centered. We're very mission-driven and employee-centered as a nonprofit that has a very, I think, compelling mission trying to save the world. And so, trying to figure out how to balance the needs of staff, meeting folks where they are, accommodating many of the concerns you raised, Glen, about differences in family situation and religious preferences and other all sorts of other ways in which folks show up to the workplace as unique individuals. Figuring out how to balance all of that. We've settled on a hybrid strategy, and I think it's the right strategy for us. I also think it's the hardest, right? I shared with the panelists that I've done a lot of research in the literature. Hybrid is frankly the worst of all possible worlds in many ways. And if you actually Google, I tried this earlier because Glenn, you asked me what's the article I was referring to. I'm like, I've seen so many, but I tried Googling it. If you type hybrid is the worst into Google, I challenge you all to do that. You will find like 1,000 articles that folks have written about why hybrid is the worst. And I believe that. I also still believe in what we're doing because it's attempting to try to build flexibility into how folks can show up for the workplace. So what we've done is we've said, if you would like to go 100% remote, we are open to that idea. Talk to your manager. Not every job can do that. We're a law firm, so we do litigate. We need to be in places. We need to run to courthouses sometimes and file emergency filings and whatnot. So not every job can be 100% remote, but many of our jobs can. In fact, most of our jobs can. And so we've had, since we reopened our offices officially about a year ago, we've had more than 25% of our staff raise their hand and say, I'd like to be in the fully remote category based on those and they keep going up based on and our hiring you mentioned earlier, Glenn, and I think Stella, you spoke to this too, is that we're finding that when we post a position that must be in a certain location, we don't get the kind of talent pool that we're looking for. When we post that we're open to fully remote, we get fabulous candidates. And so increasingly as we hire, in the organization, we're seeing that remote population is growing. We're now, I think by the end of this year, we're projecting will be over 1/3 of the organization is fully remote. And yet that's a significant chunk of staff who are still somehow tethered to an office. And so for the hybrid world, we've said, for the folks who are still, in the category of sometimes may come to an office, we've asked them to, to experiment and with different ways of how that works and to build in flexibility for staff, and while accommodating, mission needs and business needs. And so I think the point that I shared with Glenn and what you were at, the point of your question, I think where you were leading me is that, we I think took a consciously learning mode coming back into reopening our offices, and we chose to stay in this experimental, to sort of acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and we won't for some time if we ever do, and that we should try to experiment with different ways of working consciously, and to actually treat it not just like let's try this as a pilot, let's actually experiment by having a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, evaluate, and then reconfigure and try again, right? And so that sort of methodology has served us really well in trying to think about ways that we can be openly inclusive of those folks who do feel a value in coming into an office on some sort of a regular basis. We took a very team-centered approach to this by asking teams to speak, to talk amongst themselves, collaboratively decide. If you're a team that is very dispersed across the United States, it may be that you don't actually need to meet in a physical space, but infrequently, like Melinda was saying, maybe once a quarter or a couple times a year, you might come together as a team, as an intact team, and have everybody in the same room and do your strategy work. Do some of the things that benefit from actually renewing those human bonds and looking each other in 3 dimensions, right? Until we're all living in the metaverse that Stella talked about. I think there's something about that 3-dimensional, kind of human connection, the energy you get from being in the same room with folks that is highly valuable. Think about consciously how you create that. Is it once a week? Is it once a quarter? Is it once a year? What does that look like for your team? That's one of our experiments, is to actually let teams figure it out for themselves and not try to set a one-size-fits-all solution for the organization. There's some other experiments I'm happy to talk about if time allows, but I don't want to use up. I know we're running long on time.
There are also holograms, Andrew, that you can use.
I was thinking about that when you talked. If you saw the movie Kinsman, in that movie they use holograms, sit around a table. It was just like you described.
The technology is actually here, right? Like it is possible to do it. I also want to add to you, Andrew, when you say when you search hybrid is the worst. I feel like on Google, you could pretty much literally say whatever is the worst, and it'll give you lots of references for it. Because I work in online education, right? And very similar conversation, blended learning. You could also say it's the worst because people design it poorly, because it could mean so many things, right? It's not because that format is the worst, but I think the lack of thoughtful design behind that process, it's the worst.
I think that's a really good point. I realize I didn't explain why. I think it's the worst. It's the worst of all. You could either be fully remote or fully in office, and hybrid's this middle ground. And it's worse. I think you're right, because people don't design. They don't think about how to be inclusive in an environment where it's a new dimension of diversity, right? We're all coming into the world from different angles. Some of us are here in person. Some of us are here virtually. How do we create an inclusive environment where everybody feels a sense of belonging? That's really hard. And being intentional about it is what is so challenging for organizations. The other disadvantages of hybrid, of course, are that for those who are hybrid, you're losing a lot of there are huge advantages to being fully remote, right? You tap into this huge talent pool. You can be really flexible with your staff. If you tether people to an office, hybrid assumes that you're going to be in on some sort of regular basis. That means you have to live within a commuting distance, and that suddenly limits your pool of talent and whatnot. So there are disadvantages as well, and I think that's why we're trying to do this thing where we do have some hybrid staff, but we're also being very inclusive about remote work, and trying to make both of those work is not easy, but I think it's the right thing to do to be an employee-centered organization.
Yeah, I think one of my pet peeves is during COVID, so many companies pivoted to online training, and it did it so poorly that it gives distance education a bad name, right? And my response is like, you can do it in 1 week. You can pivot in 2 weeks, and especially when you don't have the know-how on how to do it, you don't have the technology in place. Like, none of these things is going to take 2 weeks. When I work for Open University, it takes a team of people for a year to 18 months to develop distance learning. So there's difference in what you consider distance remote work and distance education and remote learning. But we all kind of group them under the same term, and that's the problem.
I want to pick up a little bit on that, Stella, this idea of training. So, I did Google that, Andrew. I didn't put the worst. I just did hybrid, something like hybrid work environments analysis or something. And I do agree that everything is the worst and the best, and it's never mediocre, it's the worst or the best. And so the idea of onboarding came up. And, there are a lot of people who apply for jobs who will go through 5 interviews, and never, ever go to an office or meet someone face to face, and just, they can do that all from really, right? From any three of you, I'm curious onboarding and bringing someone onto the team. What are some things that worked or haven't worked for you? I'm interested in, well, stealth technology fails, agree, and also can we talk a little bit about onboarding and how to really include someone in Stella? I don't know if you have any thoughts about, what things about training have worked for you, or you have been successful, whether it's education or elsewhere. So whoever wants to take that first, please go ahead.
Well, I still, I think you probably have a lot to add here, but just, as you were talking, Glenn, I was thinking about, we have actually had to put a lot of thought into how we do onboarding in a remote environment, because it is, there's the traditional onboarding where you walk somebody around the office and you show them where the, filing cabinets are and the restrooms and the kitchen and whatnot. You introduce them to the folks in the office, and you lose that when somebody starts, online, and you ship them a laptop and say, here's our employee handbook, have at it on day one. It's not a very humanizing experience. And so we actually had a team come together to think about, how do we re-envision onboarding in the remote environment? How do we take care of staff who are coming to us in a truly, starting out truly virtual, especially, during the pandemic years where we literally didn't have the option of bringing them to an office. And I would say, I don't know if I have any keen insights other than, you have to be really intentional about it, right? It doesn't happen magically. You have to actually think about put yourself empathetically in the shoes of this person who is showing up on day one and knows nothing about the culture, nothing. I mean, they may know a little bit, but they really don't have the grounding in who are the people they're going to work with, what are the expectations, what are the sort of those cultural norms that we want to convey about who we are as an organization, and think about that very intentionally, how you're going to inculcate those values and that information, pass along that knowledge, and give them access to, like, here are ways you can, on your own time explore, right? And here are people you can talk to. Here's a buddy. We always assign everybody a buddy. We used to do that before. It's even more important, I think, when you have somebody starting virtually. So someone you can do a quick Teams chat with is like, where do I find the policy about, how I apply for vacation time or whatever. These, just those little things that you don't know if you don't know who to ask, you're sitting there, feeling lost. And so I think the idea of like making the resources available, walking folks through them, introducing them virtually to all the people that it will be important for them to know to be successful. And then I think really having a very intentional conversation. The manager skill set is powerful, and really investing in having good managers who can set expectations and have be supportive of their staff, and then monitor progress and help folks understand, give both constructive and positive feedback on a regular basis. All of those things really matter, I think, to helping somebody have a good starting place to set them up for success in a new job.
Yeah, I love that. Stella or Melina?
Yeah, if I can add to that, because I completely agree. We actually kind of have template by department and definitely tasks, a checklist that everybody needs to do, including, hey, go join some group calls so that you can kind of feel how it is on the tech team or how it is on the sales team, or how, so definitely things like that matter. But I was going to say, in addition to that, we actually had feedback from a mother coming back from maternity leave, where she said, I was gone for 4 months, and when I came back, I was completely lost, right? So it's almost like this onboarding about, and you think about that as well, that it happens not just once, but when people come in and go due to family leave of any sort, when they come back, they need the same level of support.
Yeah, I think that actually it's my point as well. It's that I think with technology, there's just so many things we can do now, right? For example, I don't know if you guys remember, like, your own onboarding experience, starting your job, the first day, the first few days, it's overwhelming. Just 100 million information you need to kind of take in. So I think what tech can do is to especially if you can mix in synchronous and asynchronous experiences combined. So some of them, for example, when I mean asynchronous, is perhaps you can review this information or watch this video or take a course on health and safety. But who's going to remember that your first week at work, right? And it might be something that you can store in your HR repository and people can retrieve it later. If you're on a maternity leave and you come back and you're like, I don't want to go through this entire process again, but I really just wanted to know about, I don't know, ergonomics. I can search very specific topic and refresh my memory on just that very specific best practices. So I think tech really helps with that. I think it doesn't take away having the human interaction, having the buddy, having a mentor, having somebody to like show you the rope. I think that's equally important. Whether you have an AI assistant to show you that or a human assistant, I think there needs to be some sort of live conversation, some interaction, sharing of knowledge, sharing experiences. I think that's still critical. But at the same time, it's also really good to say, I remember somebody mentioned this, that's an important form, but I forgot where to look for them. And so I think having a combination of both synchronous component, in a very humanly possible way to have that face-to-face interaction, as well as things that perhaps take a bit off your cognitive load. You don't have to take in all this information all at one go, and there's your one chance, which a lot of time when you go to your orientation or onboarding session, that's your only one chance. And if you don't remember that after 2 days, then you have to scramble and dig that up again, God knows where. So,
you'll have to Google, how do I use the coffee machine again? Because it wasn't explained well. We're actually, so the session is officially, my computer is saying it's ended. And I do want to thank all three of you for participating and all the people who've watched. And I know this is it just feels like the start of a discussion. But I do feel like we've covered some really interesting conversational topics on the idea of diversity, belonging, remote workplace. And I want to encourage, I know that some have dropped their LinkedIns here, I want to encourage us to stay connected. And to keep learning from one another and to continue this conversation. So once again, thank you to everyone. If you want to leave final thoughts, and until we're kicked out of the room, Stephen, I don't know if we need to leave right now. Welcome to do so, or else we'll see you on another platform at another time.
Yay!
Thank you, Glenn.
Guys.
Thank you, Milena and Stella. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all.
Likewise.